this in June. I was out of the country and spoke at a conference on sanctuary cities in Frankfurt, Germany, because there's a very big movement across all of Europe to declare as many of the major cities of Europe as possible as sanctuaries. And that's being very well organized. The conference that I attended and spoke at was held in the conference center of the Roman Catholic Church of Frankfurt, Germany, which is the official sponsor of all of this. And given that I was one of the key speakers, there's something interesting just right there. And I'll have more to say about that this evening, although I'll be talking more about Francis than about the German church. The cities are determined not to allow the immigrants to be a scapegoat for the problems of what austerity has imposed on the German people, and the range of organizations and institutions that are participating in this are a real challenge to the governments. They will not be able to scapegoat immigrants the way they thought they would be. How that fight will end up, no one knows, but that's a fight that's really shaping up, and it was impressive to see the determination that was coming forward from trade unions, from church groups, from all kinds of civil society groups, political parties on the left, kind of unity one wishes one saw more of in other parts of the world, and I'll leave that to your own imagination, what I might be referring to there. Before we start, I want to again tell you all that these monthly meetings, which will now resume every month, we will do it again the second Wednesday evening of August and so forth, are brought to you by the Judson Memorial Church, in which you are currently located as one sponsor, by the Left Forum, which is the second sponsor, and by Democracy at Work, which actually puts these events together. I do want to make one particular announcement that we now are pleased to do. It is possible for people who want to support what we do to sponsor these monthly events. I think I've told you about that in the past. So I want to thank two supporters, one who thought they were supporting the June meeting we didn't have, and one who sponsored this evening's. And you might be interested as I thank them. The first one is Aaron Roden of Currans Hill, Australia, a suburb of Western Sydney. We are, of course, incredibly excited and pleased to get support from Australia, something as far away as that, and we particularly appreciate Aaron Roden's support. Equally, I would like to thank Sam Bahur, a Youngstown, Ohio native currently living in occupied Palestine. He is also a supporter of this program, and if you're interested, you can visit his blog at epalestine.com. If any of you, that is those of you in the audience or those of you watching on YouTube or in other outlets, are interested in sponsoring an episode of this monthly meeting, please go to our website, Democracy at Work, that's all one word, democracyatwork.info/sponsor. All you really have to remember is Democracy at Work, and by the way, if any of you are interested, we have made up these little cards that give all the things we have on our website, and just pick one up on your way out if you'd like. But you too can sponsor this program, help pay the costs, and above all, those are the costs of this space, of the preparation for it, and of the videography that is being done from the back. Brian, who is our videographer. This will become available on YouTube within 24 to 48 hours after this evening, and we're now getting regularly between 50 and 100,000 people around the world watch this, what you're doing this evening. So this is also a good time for me to also remind everyone who's watching around the world, who we number in the tens of thousands, that the very kind people in this room have all contributed $10 to have this experience. So we appeal to you, if you're watching, that you too can go to democracyatwork.info and contribute your $10. couple of more announcements that we're very proud of. We have produced this radio show, Economic Update, that comes on every week. Some of you listen in this area where it's on WBAI. We now have over 80 stations around the country regularly broadcasting this program. And we've recently, since we last had this meeting, have been picked up by a network called iHeartRadio.com. Some of you may know them. You can now access our program on iHeartRadio. Truth Out, which is an amazing service, sends the program out every week that we produce as an audio file. And finally, if you want to see it as a television show, that's also available now. There you simply go to a place called Patreon.com, P-A-T-R-E-O-N, Patreon.com, Economic Update, and you can see me doing my radio show as a television program, modeled, sort of, on Rush Limbaugh. And finally, I want to recognize all the viewers in our YouTube community. I assume most of you know that that is a major way that the world communicates with itself these days. We now have just crossed 30,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, which is quite an achievement. And we want to thank everybody who watches us and who subscribes and follows to us. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It translates into all kinds of supports for what we do. It doesn't cost you anything, but it's just subscribe and the benefits flow to us. And if any of you are interested, I'll be glad to tell you about that. Okay, so much for all the preliminaries. Let's jump in. And before we get to the major topics, as usual, a few smaller items. In the news, literally every day, all day, week after week, is this struggle over the health insurance bill. The one passed by Obama, known as Obamacare, and the one, if one can call it that, the alternative, being pushed by Trump and the GOP, the Republican Party, beginning to be called, I noticed, Trump Care. So we have Obamacare versus Trump Care. And since I try to do this, I'd like to give you an economic analysis of what's at stake here. Obamacare, let's start. What was that? Well, it was, among other things, an attempt to correct a gross inequality between the United States and virtually all other developed countries, namely in the degree to which we provide medical insurance for people to be taken care of in the event of an illness, an injury, and so on. Most societies provide that in a general sort of way. We don't, as a nation. And that meant, for example, that when Obama became president, I forget the exact numbers, but I believe it was between 40 and 50 million Americans had no medical insurance at all. And I won't go into the inadequacy of many of those who did have it in various forms, but it wasn't very successful. So Obama decided, as his advisors did, that it would be a good thing to do, I won't question the motives, to extend the coverage, to try to provide coverage to at least most, if not all, of those who hadn't gotten it. But that's expensive. And so the problem was for Mr. Obama and his team, how do you extend medical coverage in the United States, which is expensive? How do you pay for that? But before I answer the question of how they did it, I need for you all to understand, because this is crucial, why it's so expensive, the care. Medical care is more expensive in the United States than anywhere else on earth. It's very important that you understand that. We spend roughly 17 to 18% of the total GDP, the total value of goods and services produced in this country. Almost a fifth of that we pay for in the form of medical care, by which I mean doctor, hospital, drug and medical device producer, and medical insurer. Those are the four industries to keep in your mind. Doctors, hospitals, the manufacturers of drugs and medical devices, and finally the medical insurance companies. They together operate what in economics is called a monopoly. They are the only place for you to go if you get sick, and they know it. And they've worked out a way to get you to pay through the nose. The number 2 country in the world, after the United States, pays roughly half as much, 50% of what we do. We have the most expensive medical provision of all those 4 industries in the world. Nobody's close. That's why it's so expensive. And by the way, if some of you have been seduced, and I use that word advisedly, by the notion that it's the most expensive care because it's the best, I hate to tell you, it's not. Now, most of you know that since you've gotten sick and you've noticed that it's not the best. Everybody, of course, always has the best doctor in the town, but if that's the best, you can imagine how bad some of them must be. The truth of the matter is the medical results for the American people are not that good. We don't live as long as people in many of these other countries who pay much, much less. We go to the hospital more often, we stay in the hospital longer, we consume way more medication than they do, but our results in terms of the quality of our life, the length of our life, the number of children who survive to the 1st year and the 5th year, all those basic statistics of performance put us in the middle. We're not the worst, but we're far from the best. We pay more than anybody and we get more or less mediocre results. If that were true in any other industry, there would have been a revolution long ago. That would have been changed. But if you're a monopoly, well, there's nowhere else you can go. And those 4 industries, even though they have trouble with one another, they present a common face to the rest of us, which is why we pay. Now back to Obama. If he's going to extend medical insurance to millions of people who didn't have it, and that medical care is very expensive, where's the money going to come from? He basically had several choices. Number 1, he could tax the mass of people. This would create the kind of tension that he could not politically survive. That would be the average person, many of you in this room, paying a lot more money than you did before in taxes to help those who hadn't been covered before. While some of you might be willing to do that, an awful lot of your fellow citizens will not be happy in that position, and Mr. Obama knew it. So what did he do? He decided, yes, there will be an increase in taxes for everybody, a little, it'll cost something, but he went after taxing a few of the big medical providers, the big corporations, and he put a special tax, 2 of them actually, on rich people. Taxes that would only fall on people who, as individuals, earn more than $250,000 or as couples, more than that. They were very small taxes, but those people are very wealthy, and even a small percentage on a big income generates the money. So that's what he did, and that's how he got it through. This, of course, gave an enormous opportunity to the Republicans and to Mr. Trump. The Republicans, because this is what they always do, Mr. Trump, because he's a president who's desperate, you're going to see that later, for support. He came in without the support of the Republican Party, against its leaders, and then turned against the Democratic Party, obviously, in the general election. He arrives in the position of president with very little support, so he's kind of desperate, which is what you're going to see has been the last 6 months of a desperate politician trying to find support in those places where he can. What did the Republicans do? The first thing they did, and this is straight from the Republican playbook, is to go to the wealthy and say, we're your champions. We're going to get that tax that was put on you by Obamacare to extend coverage, we're going to get that tax removed. Both of the taxes on rich people were proposed to be eliminated, not reduced, not cut, done. The problem for the Republicans turned out to be the only way you could make that work if you're not bringing in all that money is either to tax the average citizen. The Republicans don't do that. They don't want to do that any more than the Democrats do. So what could they do? They cut the coverage for 25 million, roughly, of the people who had just gotten it from Obamacare. We're going to have it taken away. This seemed to be a perfectly appropriate thing. The Republican Party found that wonderful. Mr. Trump found that wonderful. It was really wonderful until it began dawning on people in the Republicans' districts that this meant their mother or their cousin or their community. And suddenly, and this was helped, of course, by critics, by the Democrats, the kicking back against the Republicans. Well, you're taking away what we have. Remember, it's one thing not to get something proposed. It's something else if you already have it and it's going to be taken away from you. And that's what the GOP program would be, and that's why suddenly they couldn't get it passed. That's why they had to postpone the vote over the last few days. That's why it's still not clear whether they will have a vote next week or they won't, and what will happen. It's all up in the air as the Republicans and the Democrats fight each other over how many of the uninsured will be insured and how much will rich people have to pay in the way of a tax. Both sides never ask the following question: why do we permit a monopoly to confront us and gouge us for the money? Why are we spending day after day billions of dollars in the time and energy, front page news of a fight between two parties, both of whom equivalently say not a word about the prices and the profits of the drug companies, the medical insurance companies, the device makers, the doctors, and the hospitals? That's an amazing thing to watch. What's much more important is there wouldn't have to be a fight if we didn't pay these crazy prices and these enormous profits to a tiny group of industries. They are a monopoly. That's why in many countries you have what is a single payer or another kind of program like that, where the government comes in and confronts, for example, the drug companies and says, the way we're going to distribute drugs in this country is we, the government, are going to buy the drugs from you, the drug company, because you won't be allowed to sell them to anybody else. In economics, we have a name for that. It's called monopsony. Monopoly is when you have one seller. Monopsony is when you have one buyer. The way you get equivalence is if you have a monopolist on the seller side, you confront him with a monopsonist on the buyer side. The government's power to negotiate the price it wants becomes very powerful when it's the only buyer. Otherwise, the drug companies and the device companies and the insurance companies, they either sell to the government or they die. They become much more reasonable very quickly under these circumstances, as you might imagine, which is what other countries do. That's why busloads of elderly people leave the United States every day and go to Canada, a few hours north, where they buy drugs which are handled that way. Ditto if you go to many other countries. We have two political parties who never talk about it, who never debate it. It's off the chart. So we're only worried about who gets to be squeezed to pay those people. The taxpayer, the rich, the middle, the low, or we don't give coverage at all. That's a way of saving on the big bucks you'd have to pay for medical care by not giving it to people at all. Then who cares what the price is? They're not getting it anyway. If this strikes you as lunacy, good. Now you understand. That's what this is about. It is a capitalist system. Remember, it was a decision made to allow medical care to be handled as a for-profit business. What that does is it puts the question of making other people healthy again. And who are other people? You, your mother, your father, your sister, your child. Could happen to anybody. You know how disease is. It comes out of mostly nowhere and affects you and doesn't affect the person next to you. Humane societies long ago decided something that is as crazy as that, we get together to help each other. That's why we have a fire department, because the fire could happen anywhere, and we want to protect the rest of us by helping all of us pay for the fire department that puts the fire out wherever it starts. Why did we ever let this happen? Because if you put medical care into the hands of private companies, you're inserting what we call the profit motive. The company is in business to make money. That's why they hire people. That's why they reward them with more salaries and a promotion to a higher job. You're successful in your line of work if you make the company more profitable. So what you do is you create the following dilemma. What may be more profitable for a provider of medical care may not be the best care that can be provided. Some of you must have noticed this on occasion. We currently suffer, just to give you one example, not that you need it, we currently suffer in the United States from something called an opioid epidemic. Opioids are basically painkiller types of drugs. I'm talking about the legal ones now. It's a whole other conversation about the illegal ones, but the legal ones that you get a prescription to go to the doctor and you get. A few companies in this country make, you know some of the names, Oxycodone, you know. Or if you don't ask, you'll find out. Here's some statistics for you. These things started to be provided in a major way in the 1980s and 90s. I'll use 1999 as an example. We currently have 3 times more prescriptions written in the United States than we did in 1999. It's possible that the level of pain that we have as a nation has gone way up in that time. Unlikely. We currently have 4 times as many prescriptions per person as they do in Europe. What's going on? Well, if you don't know, here's how it works. The drug companies are making a fortune off of this. They have worked very hard to suggest that this is a useful thing, not just for people in extreme pain, which is what the drugs were theoretically supposed to deal with, but, you know, if you're having a bad day, why don't you pop one of these? Why don't you try? And that's why we're writing prescriptions left and right. And then, because we are such a strange country, here's the following. Millions, from everything we can tell, millions of elderly in America don't have enough to live on. Social Security isn't enough, and they can't lean on their kids enough. So what do? They develop an acute pain in fill in the blank. And they go to the doctor, and they're on Medicare, and they get a nice, big prescription for 50 pills a month. Then there's a very nice young man who comes to their door once a week or once a month and gives them $5 a pill. They paid nothing. Now they get $5 a pill, it helps them. And the nice young man resells them for $30 a pill. And so many more people can have this lovely experience. Meanwhile, the drug companies are selling the pills like there's no tomorrow. See, you're in the wrong business. That we do not enter in, that we do not see the root cause of this problem, that we are allowing medical care to be provided by people whose first priority is the famous bottom line, and that therefore this kind of thing I just described has happened. That would be shame on you if you didn't understand it. I'm quite convinced that the Republicans and Democrats in Congress, no geniuses they, but they know that this is going on. That dumb, they're not. But you can't talk about it. You can't deal with it because that industry gives a lot of money. One of the biggest donors to political candidates in the country, the drug company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the issue here. The issue is the private capitalist delivery of medical care, not this endless debate between Obamacare and Trump care, which are 2 parties who are debating over what doesn't matter precisely so that we don't have a national debate over this question of what is the root cause of all of this. All right, that's the first one. One more on the drug and medical profession because I could go on all night, but I won't. But I'll give you a couple more. A new problem has afflicted them. They've jacked up the prices of drugs. You know, there were those famous cases over the last few months, Mr. Shkreli, or however you pronounce his name, with raising it, 100 times or whatever it was, and other cases like that. Well, the drug prices have been going up so high that more and more Americans who are covered with a medical insurance, say from where they work or something, or the government if they work for the government, they still have to pay a deductible, and the deductible is now so high because the cost of the medicines are so high that people are avoiding to go, even when they're covered, because they can't pay the damn deductible. This is terrible for the drug companies. Because if you don't go to get the medicine because you can't cover the deductible, well, then the prescription isn't written and the drug company hasn't got the sale. They don't care who pays them, whether it's you or the insurance company. They just want to sell the damn thing. So it's a problem for them that people can't afford the deductible. And they came up with a genius answer. They set up foundations with lovely, warm names, helping the ill, helping our fellows. You know what the foundation does? The drug companies give the money to the foundation. The foundation gives the money to the poor to pay the deductible, because that still leaves a mammoth profit. Now the poor can go have their deductible taken care of by the very company that is overcharging the insurance company for the rest of it. You get the picture? But if you think that allows you to escape, it doesn't. Because when the insurance has to pay these crazy prices, they turn around and charge your employer more money for the policy that covers you as a worker. At which time the employer says to you, either you're fired, I am not going to pay that, or I'm going to deduct out of your weekly check more and more. There's a strike going on right now. Just to give you an example, in California, AT&T workers, roughly 17,000 telephone workers, have rejected a contract. It's very interesting. Their union and AT&T signed a contract. Gave them 11% increase over 4 years. That's not very much, folks. That's 2.5% a year. And if prices go up, that's gone anyway. But alongside the 2.5% a year, they required them to make a much larger contribution to their medical coverage. They would now have to pay 29% of the cost of the premiums, which are going up. Why? Because of the story I just told you. And those workers said, we're not accepting this contract, even though their union had negotiated it. Because if you look at what we'll have to pay for medical, and you look at the small increase, and you take the risk of inflation, we're losing over 4 years. We're not getting ahead. Wow. Workers standing up, and if I had time, I would talk to you about that, because it's beginning to happen everywhere. Over the next few weeks, you're going to see a struggle over an effort by the United Auto Workers to organize a Nissan plant in Mississippi, which, if they get it done, will change the whole nature of the labor movement's attitude and sense of its own capability, which is very low these days. But why is all this happening? Because of this maneuver of the profit-driven drug company, in this case, to figure out a way to sell these overpriced drugs. And if that means having to give the poor the ability to pay for the deductible, they'll do that too. And the poor will say, thank you, I have now my medicine, not realizing you may lose your job. Your pay is going to be hurt by this because the company is going to push back on you the cost of the extra insurance premiums to pay the crazy prices. And the only reason the insurance companies go along with it is what they want, they get the drug companies to support in exchange for vice versa. They scratch each other's back so that these four industries together have that monopoly. Doctors, hospitals, drug and device makers, and the insurers. Enough with that. Okay. Next short update. Seattle, Washington. They did something amazing last week. The City Council of Seattle has 9 members on it. They voted 9-0, unanimous, to tax rich people and their incomes in Seattle. If you earn more than $250,000 a year, or if you're a couple more than $500,000 a year, you have to pay an income tax to the city of Seattle. 2.25%. Enough to raise $140 million for the city of Seattle, allowing it to transform its schools and its public parks and a lot of other things they've long wanted to do. Wow. Unanimous. Not only that, the current mayor, an enthusiastic supporter. The last mayor, also. Everybody's on board because the overwhelming majority of Seattle's people love it. as the majority everywhere would. It's just that the people in Seattle, for all kinds of reasons, have gotten it together to make something happen. Why is this significant? Well, beyond the fact that few other cities have yet dared to do it, Washington has one of the most regressive tax systems in the United States. Out of the 50 states, it's one of the worst. What do I mean? Regressive tax is a tax that makes no effort to put the burden according to your capacity to pay. So for example, a regressive tax is a sales tax. If you go in and you buy a shirt at TJ Maxx, you pay the same tax as would Rockefeller who went in and bought that shirt. So there's no attempt to discriminate according to your ability to pay. Same is true with excise taxes that you pay on alcohol or on tobacco or things like that. The income tax in the United States is unusual, particularly the federal income tax, because it has always been not regressive, but progressive. What that means is the higher your income, the higher the percentage of it you are asked to pay. In other words, the tax is thought to appropriately, properly reflect your capacity to pay. It's a principle of all progressive taxes, and there are lots of them. Washington had no income tax, neither in any of its cities nor at the state level. Just think how different it is from New York, which has both an income tax at the state level and an income tax here in New York City. So this is an effort, and this was said explicitly by the politicians in Seattle. We want to change not just the conditions of Seattle, we want to challenge in court the whole state apparatus of putting the burden on those who are poorest. Because obviously if you have low income, the tax you pay, the sales tax on your shirt, is a higher portion of your income than if you were Mr. Rockefeller who could care less. So it's not only that it's the same for everybody, but it's a bigger burden the poorer you are to pay X dollars in a tax, which is why we have a federal progressive income tax. So this is an attempt by the people of Seattle to change the whole tax structure to make it much less unfair. New York has lots of regressive taxes. Could be and should be challenged on the same basis. But at the very least, and I could tell from your faces, many of you didn't know what happened last week in Seattle. And that's not an accident either. The very people who own newspapers are, this is going to come as a surprise, in the people who earn the big bucks. So they're not that eager for you all to get excited the way I am about what the people in Seattle have done. And to be fair, Seattle City Council is also remarkable because sitting on it is a socialist, Kshama Sawant. Some of you have heard about her. She's now been re-elected. She ran once, and now she ran for re-election. She was elected again. She's a member of the, I forget the name. Socialist Alternative, thank you. The Socialist Alternative Party is called there, and she's run on that basis. She's a very attractive candidate and done very well. And I'm sure that had more than a little to do with raising these ideas. But the interesting thing is not so much that a socialist would raise those ideas. That's kind of to be expected. What's really important is that she, in her effort to persuade, found fertile ground. The vote was 9-0 to do this in the city council of a major city. Next item. This is complicated, but I want to do it. I want to talk to you, as I have on occasion in the past, about Pope Francis. This may come as a surprise to you, but I pay attention to what Pope Francis says. And I'm not disappointed because he's been saying remarkable things, not least of which in the last couple of weeks. The end of June, beginning of July, so 10 days ago, 12 days ago, he gave a speech in Rome to the delegates of the Confederation of Trade Unions in Italy. It's called the Confederazione Italiana Sindicati Lavoratori. Italian language is musical, so you can see the difference. So let's begin by noticing that Pope Francis is addressing a meeting of unions. The man is a busy man. Catholic Church has over 1 billion people that are at least nominally members. So he's taking the time out to give a talk to a trade union conference. Mr. Trump hasn't managed that yet. I'm sure he will, but not yet. He opens his, I'm going to quote to you a few things. I don't have the time. I have the entire speech here. If any of you want to see it, you can get a hold of it. I want to quote to you a few of them, of what he says. These are quotes. Certainly the person is not only formed by labor. We must also think of a healthy culture of idleness, of knowing how to rest. This is not laziness. It is a human need to which the unions should be attentive. Let me go on. He's talking next about pensions. The right to a fair pension is not always recognized, and not at all the word fair. Fair means, I'm quoting now, it should be neither too poor nor too rich. Golden pensions are no less an offense to labor than pensions that are too low, as they ensure that the inequalities during the time of work become permanent. That should not happen. Next. Two challenges confront the trade union movement today, he says. The first has to do with prophecy. Unions have to be active in society. They perform the function of a necessary critical voice for those who have no other voice. As is shown by the great tradition of the CISL, that's the name of the Italian. By the way, the CISL in Italy would be like the AFL-CIO in the United States. It's the Union of Unions. The great tradition of the CISL, the unions movement has its great success when it is prophecy, when it includes everybody, the prophecy of a better society and how to get it. And now here, these are the words now he uses. But in our advanced capitalist societies, the union risks losing its prophetic nature and becoming too similar to the institutions and powers that it should instead criticize. The union, with the passing of time, has ended up resembling politics, or rather political parties, their language, their style. And instead, if this typical and diverse dimension is lacking, diverse in collecting everybody together, its action within business will lose strength and effectiveness. That's his message to the union movement. Next. The second challenge to unions is innovation. Again, I quote, "The union does not carry out its essential function of social innovation if it watches over only those that are inside the union, if it protects the rights only of those who already work or who are retired. This must be done, but it is half of your work," he says to the unions. "Your vocation is also to protect those who do not yet have rights, those excluded from work, or who are also excluded from rights and from democracy." Next, I promise not too much more, but this is a remarkable pope, and you ought to get to know him. Quote, here we go. "The capitalism of our time does not understand the value of the trade union because it has forgotten the social nature of the economy. This is one of the greatest sins," says the Pope. "But perhaps our society," I'm continuing reading, these are his words, "but perhaps our society does not understand the union also because it does not fight enough in terms of the not yet rights, of the existential peripheries among those rejected from work. Let us think of the 40% of young people under 25 who do not have work." That's the statistic in Italy right now. Right? 40% of people under 25 have no work and do not go to any school. They are simply unemployed. I'll stop, tempted as I am to go on. This is a remarkable image here, and I don't know what it does for practicing Roman Catholics, but it is interesting how they must now struggle with what this Pope is saying to them about modern capitalism and the role of criticism of that capitalism and the role of unions. It's not what Americans in general understand or see, and particularly for those who listen and pay attention to a Pope, this is interesting, and it's a sign of change. And if I could be allowed an opinion, the Roman Catholic Church is a remarkable institution, whatever your particular feelings about the religion. It started in a slave society. It survived across into feudalism. It managed the transition into capitalism. That's an institution with a remarkable capability of adapting to enormous changes that made many other institutions fall by the wayside. The Catholic Church understood the need to change radically to survive in a changed world. Maybe there's a hint that this is a church leader who understands that the system that the church has cohabited with for 300 years is dying. And it's time to position the church for a different society, not the one that's going down, but maybe the one that's trying to get born. It's something the church has done before, and reading him as I do now makes you wonder. Okay, next. There are 4 states in the Union that I want to single out. This time not for approval, but for whatever the opposite is, disapproval. I want to give you their names, and I want to tell you why. The states are Missouri, Iowa, Kentucky, and Maine. What's unique about these 4 states is that over the last short period of time, they have, ready? Lowered the minimum wage. I want to let that sink in. And particularly for those of you that are thinking of visiting Missouri, Iowa, Kentucky, or Maine, I want you to be aware of where you're going and what is being paid to whoever it is that's giving you your hamburger and french fries or whatever else you might be doing there. To give you a sense of the context, minimum wage. United States, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 per hour. That is so low that anyone earning that falls way below the poverty level in the United States. That is so low that it means you work an hour and you have a little bit of change from your latte. That is so low that you can actually do a calculation, which has been done by the World Economic Forum, which takes the minimum wage in all countries that have it, subtracts from that the taxes that are taken out. Because remember, when you earn the minimum wage, you don't actually take that money home. You don't take home $7.25 because the taxes are taken out normally. So I'm going to list to you the countries in the world whose minimum wage after taxes is larger than that of the United States. I want you to see what countries have decided that they can afford to pay their lowest paid workers more, and in many cases, much more than we do. Okay. The minimum wage in the United States when taxes are removed, $6.26 per hour. I'm now going to list you the countries that pay their minimum wage workers higher than that. Ready? Number 1 country in the world, Australia, pays more to the minimum wage workers than any other country. But here are the other countries that pay more than the United States. Luxembourg, Belgium, Ireland, France, Netherlands, New Zealand, Germany, Canada, and the United Kingdom. What an amazing thing to be able to say about the United States. A, that all of those countries can manage to pay their lowest paid workers more than we do. Many of those countries are not as wealthy as we are. But the only thing that's even more powerful than that is to say, given that low minimum we pay compared to others, 4 of our states are lowering it. I can't come up with a comment that would be more than telling you the fact, so I'll leave it there. Last item for which I have time before we do the major things. This has to do with a company in San Diego, California. I'm sure you've never heard of it, unless you are from that area. The company is called Modern Times Beer. It's a company that brews beer in San Diego. It has 118 employees. It is about 5 years old, and it currently produces over 40,000 barrels of beer per year, which it distributes, I assume, in the West Coast and areas like that. Why am I bringing this to your attention? Well, I found out about it because someone who listens to our radio show from that area thought I should know about it, and she was right. Here's what's interesting. Last week, the owner, whose name I'm happy to give you, Jacob McLean, Jacob, is it McLean? McKean, sorry, M-C-K-E-A-N, Jacob McKean, the owner and entrepreneur who started that business and has made it a successful beer business, gave his employees 30% ownership of the company. He turned over 30% of the ownership to his workers. We only do that for dramatic effect. Thank you very much. The timing was excellent. Jacob McKean's company called Modern Times Beer has become 30% owned by those 118 workers that work in his brewery. But what's even more interesting is he fully intends to make it 100% owned by the workers. Even that would not have made me bring it to your attention. But I discovered that Mr. McKean has even bigger ambitions. He doesn't want the company just to be owned by the workers. That wouldn't be enough, he said. He wants it to be run by the workers too. He doesn't want them to be passive shareholders who turn over the running of the company to a board of directors in just the way regular companies are run. No, he doesn't. He wants the workers to own it as the first step in becoming the directors as well as the owners of the company. I am pledged to do that, he says, and now I want to read to you his answer to 2 questions in an interview. Here's the first one. One way I pledge to keep this industry, the craft beer industry, awesome, is by never selling my brewery to big beer. Big beer is Budweiser and all of that, which is a big problem for these little craft beers that get going, and then the big ones come in, give them an offer they can't refuse, and that's why Budweiser has 400 different labels. So when you go to some area and you get some weird little name beer, and it's the same Budweiser, just in a different can. And it charges you more. Anyway, I don't want to ever sell my brewery to big beer. But I know there will likely come a time when I'm tired of carrying the weight of so much responsibility. But when that time comes, this is what I want you to listen to. When that time comes and I'm no longer interested in this business, I'm not going to screw the people who made my success possible in the first place. That would be an unethical choice I could never be proud of. I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to everyone in this industry, in this enterprise. And when it comes time for me to do something else, I refuse to throw a hand grenade over my shoulder on my way out the door. Oh, goodness, what an image of the entrepreneur. I want to drive that home. This is a businessman, it could be a businesswoman too, who is proud of having started and succeeded in building a business, but who believes that what he is proud of, having started a business, having drawn in 118 people whose lives now also depend on that business, that he hasn't got the right or the ethical entitlement to act as though it's just his, because it isn't. As he says, they all contributed to my success, to the success of this business. How could I walk out the door and say, it's mine to do with as I wish? That would be the equivalent of throwing a hand grenade on your way out the door. He's not going to do that. Next quotation from him, Jacob McKean. I've certainly given this a great deal of thought. I've learned that if the employees are not passionate about what the company makes and how it operates, they won't see themselves as having a future there. Even a 100% worker-owned company, that's called an ESOP, E-S-O-P, does not have to offer any meaningful governance or management role to the employees. But the consequences of doing that is that the company's owners aren't invested in the company's direction. That's a formula for a bad culture, a bad enterprise, and that will lead to a sale eventually, and I don't want that. That's the opposite of what we want. So now notice, not only ethically is this entrepreneur committed to giving his workers the ownership and the operation, but he's arguing that the success of this business depends on doing that. You know what he's saying? That the capitalist organization, a few owners and a mass of people doing the work, isn't efficient, isn't effective, has no justification in terms of how good the outcome is. Its only value is to enrich the few at the top who sit on this pyramid. And they've tried to fool us into thinking there's something specially efficient. And when I say us, I mean particularly the economics profession, because we reproduce that nonsense all the time. All right, let me turn now to the topics for tonight, the big ones. Evaluating 6 months of the Trump GOP economy. I'm doing that briefly because you asked me to, but briefly because there's not much to report. There really isn't. I don't mean to be cute, I'm glad you're laughing, but it's not really my intent. What has Mr. Trump, in terms of economics, done? Mostly nothing. Lots of words, lots of Twitters, tweets, and all that. Lots of noise. But when you get right down, what is it he's done? Not much. Let me give you some sense of it. One of the biggest themes in his campaign was he's going to really do something about all those goods coming in from other countries that are made by workers over there, and that he's going to really do something to give those jobs to Americans. He went to the coal industry and said, I'm going to bring back coal. He went to the auto industry and said, you can't keep moving out of the country. We're going to bring the auto companies back here. None of that has happened. The coal industry is a disaster. For those of you not aware of it, coal has been on a decline of 100 years. 100 years ago, we had almost 1 million workers in the coal fields. Today, we have under 30,000. That's a long-term... By the way, it's not Mr. Trump's fault, but the notion that he's going to bring back coal, silly. The automobile companies are continuing to move out. Ford has just announced an enormous shift of its production to China. The automobile industry in the United States is in very deep trouble. It is going down fast. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's been a drop-off of at least 10 to 20,000 workers just in the last 3 months. More is coming. The American people borrowed a ton of money over the last 4 years to buy cars. And they can't afford the payments. They're having more and more trouble, and they can't buy new cars. It's a disaster. It's a real disaster. So there's no tariff. There's not even talk anymore of tariff, let alone, there's no bill in Congress to have a big tariff. All of that has it's the only way to describe it. Okay. Nothing. Tax reform. All we get from the president is he's working on it. And from the Republicans, they're working on it. They're working on an overhaul of the tax system, okay? We haven't had one. And the latest comment is we'll have one by the first of the year. Oh, that's half a year away. So I'll come back to you and we'll talk about it in January and we'll see whether there's something there. We've already talked about the health bill. It's not clear what that is or where it's going, but a radical transformation of the economics of health is precisely what is not being considered. These are details. They affect millions of people who get coverage or not. For them, it's very important. I understand that. But in terms of the health system in the United States, no, there's nothing happening there. So where is change happening? Well, there is some change happening, but it's mostly what you don't see and hear unless you pay an awful lot of attention. What Mr. Trump is doing is replacing all of the traditional bureaucrats in all of the different agencies. Those put there by Obama, those that come from even earlier, the Bush administrations and so on. He's replacing them with what? He's replacing them with the only friends he's got. And that takes me back to something I talked to you about an hour ago. This is a president who comes into office with very few friends. The establishment of the Republican Party hates him. Hated him then, hates him now. Just watch Mr. McCain or some of the other leading Republican politicians. When they talk about them, it's not so hard to see the foam at the corner of their mouth. They do not like the man, they hate him, and all the rest. So he didn't have many friends in the establishment of the Republican Party. And he certainly had no friends in the Democratic Party, establishment or otherwise. So he comes into power with very few allies. He was already running with very few allies. For those of you who don't remember, when he began running, he was considered a clown. He was made fun of. He was ridiculed. He was dismissed. For a man with an ego of the size you can now see, this must have been painful. And so he began to look for who, both before he won the election and after, who's going to be with him? Who's going to support him? It's not an accident that the first thing he did was give the American military more money than they asked for. He had to get some support from the people who, if he coughed the wrong way, could brush him away like a fly. So that had to be taken care of. That's taken care of. No problem. They now have more money than God. What was the second thing he did? The second thing he did was make a fundamental decision. I don't know, I wasn't there, but you can see from everything that's happened since. And that decision was, I am going to deliver to the few parts of the Republican Party that were in my corner as I was running. The Steve Bannons, the senator whose name I always block out, who's now our Attorney General, Sessions. That. Beauregard. If you talk to anyone who comes from that part of the country, if you were born around the time he was and your family put the name Beauregard in it, you know their politics. You don't have to guess. Anyway, he found a few friends. And his strategy, as best I can tell, is to give to the most conservative, right-wing portion of the Republican Party everything they ever wanted. That's the deal. You support me, you give me some popular support, and I will give you what you never dreamed you'd get. And I want to take my hat off in recognition to the fact that people like Steve Bannon, like the fundamentalist Christian churches, they understood that before a lot of other people. They began to realize that this odd, 3 times married, crazy real estate hustler from New York, the last person on earth they would have thought to have a close relationship, is going to surprise them by needing them and therefore giving them what no other Republican, including the Bushes and all the others, ever did. They were right. They figured it out. They even found passages in the Bible that say it's very important for them, remember, well, there is apparently a passage in the Bible, maybe more than one, which says something like, you will be surprised that salvation may come through a person who looks like the furthest thing from it. And so that comforted them that maybe this is it. But the political and economic reality is that's what he's doing. You want to have private schools and charter schools and voucher schools instead of public schools? Good. Do it. You want to roll back civil rights legislation for do it. You're my people. You're the only people I seem to be able to get. So I'm going to give you so you support me. I want you to stay with me no matter what I tweet, no matter how awful it looks, no matter how horrible the media paint me, you stay with me. They do, by and large. Not all, but most, at least so far. And that's because he gives them something. So what's really changing is all through the agencies, the EPA, the Food and Drug, you name it, the agencies that he can nominate people to lead it. So they're making little rule changes. Together, they will make big changes in America, but we will slowly understand them because the big signature issues of Mr. Trump's campaign and the big signature issues of his government, not much. He can't get it through the Congress. He can't get the public support that he might need to roll it through. He makes as many enemies as friends literally every week. He cannot shake this Russia stuff. The Democrats have hung it on him, and they're not going to let go. And, you know, the press being what it is, this is exciting. So we will hear about every relative Trump has and who he's spoken to and what he said and what he meant. And we'll drown in the utter irrelevance of it all. We'll just drown in it. And every night the TV announcer will be as excited as they were last week about whatever the next installment of this soap opera. Yes?
What about the huge sales to Taiwan, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Japan?
Those are
Hundreds of billions of dollars
yes,
in arms.
same issue. That's when I said before he gave to the military more than they wanted, that's it. The military want those sales. That's wonderful for them. That's basically the United States, your tax money being given to Saudi Arabia in one form or another, which then comes back in purchasing these military weapons. It's part of the game. It's very old. It may do horrible things in that if these weapons are used. Right now, it's not clear whether Saudi Arabia will go to war against Qatar with all the things that are going on there. The Libya and Afghanistan, just a word, it's not the topic I want to deal with, but Afghanistan is about to get another infusion of 4,000 to 5,000 more troops. All right, folks, really, just as human beings, the rationale is that we need to support the Afghanistani troops. We need to train the Afghanistani police. This is where we came in 15 years ago. This is the same junk. Each time it's promised, this one will do it. We will have a surge. We will have this. We will have. It doesn't work. We can't win in Afghanistan. We've already lost several times. We just continue to lose because it's too difficult politically for whoever's in power to actually admit it's over. We lost. It was an immense mistake, costing $1 trillion, and how many lives we'll never know. It's like Iraq. It never stops. Or Vietnam, which at least at some point stopped. We were waiting for the stop there. But that's another issue. Let me go on. The G20 meeting in Hamburg. Who are the G20? And I know this is hard to follow. First of all, because there's a G8 and there's a G6. And unless you're very unusual, you don't follow these numbers because you don't play bingo either. My apologies to those of you who do play bingo. G20, those are 19 nations plus the European Union. That's where the 20 come from. They started meeting first in 1999 when it was just a sort of an idea we ought to get together, and nobody took it seriously. When the big crisis hit in 2008, they took it seriously. Now there needed to be coordination because the system they all have had fallen apart. So this is the 12th meeting since 2008 that they've had, and it brings together the leaders of these 20, not all, but mostly the 20 richest countries in the world. And they met in Hamburg, Germany. The host country for this meeting was Germany. Angela Merkel, the leader of the chancellor in Germany, welcomed them. She was born in the city of Hamburg, so it's her hometown. So I thought I would mention a little bit what they do. Mostly these are political photo ops. Not much goes on there, a little bit. Mr. Trump had a nice meeting with Mr. Putin, about which 2 or 3 days worth of media attention were used. Sorry. Had to let that one go. And there were other meetings of enormous excitement in which we were treated to seeing whether the handshake went this way or that way. Well, if you got nothing to report on, you report on that. You know, it's the old, you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. If you can't photograph what you want, you photograph what there is. So that's what they did. Nothing. So I'm not really interested in that, since nothing was accomplished that I could discern. Nothing. There was a little bit this weak statement about the climate agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement, which every one of the other countries has now signed on to and committed to, except the United States, which has refused to do it. So that made Mr. Trump look as weird and different as he already did. That pleased everybody, including him, because he comes back to his base who wants him to be different from everybody else. That's how he got elected. I'm not like all the others. He actually made a case, and he's keeping that going. That's part of why these tweets happen the way they do. You may find it all appalling, but there are other people for whom this is heroic. And you won't understand American politics if you don't see that. So what do I want to tell you about the G20? I want to tell you about the leadership that gathered there. I want to tell you about them, things you may not know or may not have put together. Because what it reveals is that the leaders of capitalism these days are a pathetic lot. It's not just ours. It's not just our leader. Let's start with Angela Merkel, who appears these days to be like the best to many people. She's in her position of power because of an alliance between two political parties in Germany. One is called the Christian Democratic Union, and the other one is called the Christian Social Union. She is, in short, very Christian. And her party had a meeting a few days before the G20 met. And at that meeting, they had to discuss what they would do, these two parties that are in alliance. By the way, the Christian Democratic Union is all over Germany. The Christian Social Union is in the south, the Bavaria, Munich part of Germany. They had to have a meeting because in the Bundesrat and the Bundestag, the two houses of the German parliament, there was a bill. And the bill was to recognize same-sex marriage. Ready? The two Christian unions overwhelmingly voted against it. Mrs. Merkel voted against it. Okay? That's the leadership. You might be interested to know that there were some defections from her party, and the unanimity of the left, the bill passed. Same-sex marriage is now legal in Germany. But not because of her, despite her. Keep in mind what kind of leadership you're suggesting this is. Let's move on. Theresa May from England. Miss Austerity, whose political calculations rival those of, I can't imagine anybody less effective than her. She shoots herself in the foot every 2-3 days. She's on her way out. She may have turned the government over to Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and Jeremy Corbyn in England is like Bernie Sanders here, sort of. So she's in terrible trouble. Her country's ripped apart by the whole Brexit issue. She is not leading anything. She went to Hamburg because it's not London. Who else? London is very unpleasant for her these days. She thought she was going to be a shoo-in, and the shoes are coming at her instead of, in any case. Well, let's continue. Vladimir Putin, I'm not going to comment. You all have some thoughts about what that is. leader of a major country who is basically a dictator, or if not a dictator, then certainly a man of extraordinary, unbridled power that's not constrained by hardly anything. Mr. Temer, if I'm pronouncing his name right, from Brazil. A man whose level of corruption that we know of, not even to speak of what I'm sure is coming down the road, this is a crook leading a major country. We have Mr. Nieto from Mexico trying to equal Temer's record. We have Mr. Zuma from South Africa. Strange consequence given the kind of heroic leadership that made South Africa free, finally, from the apartheid of so many years. What an amazing difference between the person who got them out and what they have now. I could go on, but there's no point. The Germans, which is where this all took place, have a phrase which I am now going to give you, and then I'm going to give you the English translation. In German, the phrase goes like this: Fett schwimmt oben. In English, that means the fat, as in a soup, rises to the top. Or the scum, as in a pond that's stagnant, rises to the top. This was the phrase a clever German humor magazine described for the assembled in Hamburg last week. Next, small item, but not so small. Over the last 2 or 3 weeks, if you've paid attention to financial writing, you've seen the city of Seattle come back in a different way, not about voting for an income tax, a different issue. The minimum wage. It turns out a group of economists associated with the University of Washington in Seattle did a study, and it showed, and this was very exciting for the journalists, it showed that if you raise the minimum wage, there will be some workers who will be fired by their employer rather than pay that worker a higher wage. This was thought to be a thunderbolt. 2 weeks earlier, a group of economists at the University of California in Berkeley did a similar study, also focused on Seattle, in which they showed that raising the minimum wage has no discernible effect on employment. And so it went back and forth. There were editorials in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, there were op-eds. Oh, which is it? Is it that we can, like the Democrats want, raise the minimum wage, help those poor people, give them a better wage? Or are the conservatives right by saying, shame on you, stinky liberals. You want to raise the wage. You don't realize it's going to lose work, lose jobs for the people whose wages you raise when they get fired by their employer. Now, it takes a level of credulity that I don't possess to take seriously conservatives who are worried about unemployment of poor people. It's not a position you find them championing terribly often, like them never. So what is this about? They don't want the minimum wage to be raised because restaurants and other businesses want to be able to pay dirt low wages. You don't need a PhD for this. But what struck me and what I want to bring home is that professional economists, people like me, are spending huge amounts of time debating whether we could or should raise the minimum wage, whether or not there'll be some people fired. What? If you give a happy damn about these people, you'll raise their wage and give them a job. What do you do? If private people lay you off because they're not going to give you $8 an hour instead of $7.25, then if you give a damn, the government comes in and hires them, which is what we did in the 1930s for millions of people. The economists ought to be working out how do you give people a decent wage and give them a job, because that's what our profession ought to be doing. But no, we are debating whether we should raise the minimum wage, lose a few jobs, or keep those jobs but give them nothing for it. You know what this is like? This is like walking down a dark alley where you know you shouldn't be. And suddenly what you feared accosts you, a nasty-looking fellow who says to you, I'm going to give you a choice. I'm going to get your wallet. I'm either going to get it by stabbing you or I'm going to get it by shooting you. But it's your choice. Now imagine a person who starts to walk down the alley trying to weigh these two. Right? That kind of person needs a lot of help. Because the rational response is, I'm not accepting this choice, Jack. I am going to surprise you because I've got a gun. Here it is. Or whatever you can do. But you're not going to weigh these two because they are equally awful. You're going to try to use your brain to figure out how do I get out of this situation, not how do I choose between these outrageous impositions. An economics profession worth its salt would be figuring out how do you provide decent income to people and a job. Not debating whether we should have more unemployed or more poor people. Wow. But it tells you something in a society when that happens. It's a little bit like Obamacare versus Trump care rather than the issue which confronts all of us about the absurdity of how we organize our health. Finally, John is doing well there. Finally, Uber. I've done this once before, but I guess it needs to be explained again. Uber. Uber is not about technology. That is, the technology of how we can have a little application on our cell phone that allows us to tap a few times and summon a car to pick us up. That technology is already used by the taxi cab industry in many cities, including the New York City and so on. This is not about technology. This is not about the sharing economy. Oh, for God's sake, please. Madison Avenue comes up with this crap. That's their job. They get well paid. You are not required to take it seriously. Don't. It doesn't reflect well on you. Okay? Don't. It's not about sharing. It's not about gig economy. None of that. This is an old scam. That's all it ever was. And it's played over and over again. Here's how it works. To illustrate it, I'm going back to the origins of the taxi industry, because that's what Uber is. It's if somebody is driving a vehicle, you need to get from point A to point B, and you call them up and you give them some money and they drive you from point A to point B. This is not technically complicated. Taxis did that. They did it with horse-drawn carriages, and then they did it with motorized vehicles and so on. Here's the problem that the taxi industry faced. When you got in a taxi, back in a horse-drawn one at the turn of the century, of the last century, or a car, the early days, the early decades, you quickly discovered that a capitalist business, which is what taxis quickly became, an employer who owned the cars and hired the workers to drive them, you quickly discovered that they were in the business not of taking you to places you want to go, but of making money off of you. You think it's about you. That's charming. It isn't. It never was. It's about making money. And so that led the cab companies to do what? They didn't maintain the cabs real well. They didn't insure them real well. They didn't worry about who the cab driver was a whole lot. So maybe he was, or she was, well, there weren't many she's in those days. He was not the upstanding member of the community you might have liked to be driving you around, and he was driving you around in a vehicle that was about to die, but wouldn't be insured in any case. So then you had an accident. The driver went into the telephone pole or the hydrant, and you got hurt, and you discovered there's no insurance. And this happened over and over again. And you know what people did after a while? what they have done to virtually every capitalist industry? They said, this is intolerable. And so they said there must be somebody who will make sure that this service provided to us by people making money isn't going to be making money for them at our expense, hurting us. There has to be maintenance of these cars. There has to be vetting of the driver. There has to be adequate insurance, and this has to be made sure of. So they established, you guessed it, a commission of public officials. Here in New York, it's called the Taxi and Limousine Commission. If you look on the license plate, it says TLC, Taxi Limousine Commission. That's what it is everywhere. Now we have a problem. If you're going to make it safe by keeping the car up, if you're going to have good insurance, if you're going to make sure the driver knows how to drive and drinks less than 12 quarts of liquor a day, etc., if you're going to do all those things, it's going to cost money. The insurance costs money. Maintenance of the car costs money. That's what they were saving to make money, what you want them to do. So the way it's handled is, okay, we're going to set the rate for a cab ride, which is set by that commission in New York, for example. We're going to set it high enough that the company will make the money that will allow them to do what we're going to require them to do in the way of maintenance. You get the picture? So now the price of a taxi ride is fairly high, but at least you know you're safe. Okay, you got that picture? Now, what that means is you've created a situation where any crooked capitalist hustler sees a fantastic opportunity. What's the opportunity? To come in and offer a taxi ride that is not covered by insurance, not adequately maintained, and hires only ex-cons from the maximum security ward. And that company can offer the price lower, can make a fortune, because you'll use it because you don't want to pay for the taxi. And guess what? You'll get in there, and what has Uber had as its problem? It has had people who rape the passenger. This is not attractive, right? People who've had accidents without being covered. People who... Guess what? Uber is recapitulating exactly what the situation was before. And you know what's going to happen? Either there'll be no Uber, or Uber will come under a commission, so it has to do what it is we will not permit it to do because too dangerous for us. All that Uber is that hustler who comes in under the agreement, who knows that the public has been so angry at capitalists in the past that it has put a commission on them, and so they come in and slide underneath it and figure for a few years we can get by before they kind of catch up to us and have another commission. We'll make a bundle, which Mr. Kalanick did. Uber did. And even if they don't continue, that's the way this story goes. Either you get brought in under the you understand? It got nothing to do with technology. This is a person who comes in and offers you a cheap deal. You know what this is like? I'm not predicting this. I'm just describing to you a model. It's like finding out next week that there is a fantastic new airline. Will take you to California for $81. Take you to London for $103. And you are going to be very tempted until you read the headline that the thing crashed in the ocean. And that when it did, there was no insurance to cover you. Because they came in and they found a way to get out. And nothing is better than to cover this scam with notions about a sharing economy, a gig economy, allowing immigrant drivers to have a decent income when it's so hard for, wonderful. That's what you hire Madison Avenue for. To cover something that looks and smells like, so that it can be presented as if it were perfumed soap. When you use it, you discover what it is. That's all Uber is. Yeah.
So how did Uber raise so much money to fund its operation?
Because they convinced a lot of smart venture capitalists that they could make a fortune doing what I've just told you. They did. And they did. What?
They didn't use their own brand.
To Uber then? Why do cab drivers switch to Uber then?
They make more money. They make more money.
So then doesn't that mean that there's at least a safeguard in the fact that we can now track Uber drivers and we know who they are? That's at least
Sure, but
somebody responsible?
absolutely. More and more, we're going to control Uber because we have to. I just want you to see that is the recapitulation of the same thing. We're going to do to Uber what we had to do to the cab drivers in the first place. And you're pleased that we're moving in that direction. Of course. What option have we? Well, let me conclude with that. We have the option of saying we are not going to be dependent for the provision of the goods and services we need as human beings on having that done by an entity whose first priority is something else, which is to make money. You know, stop, folks. This isn't complicated. To get this, you just got to go back to third grade. If you want people to be focused on providing the best possible service at the lowest possible cost, then what you ought to do is to set up an entity, and that's its charge. That's what you're supposed to do. And then to develop mechanisms to see how they're doing, to measure what they do. That's what you should do. We don't do that. We set up enterprises whose first job is to make money, to grow the enterprise. Well, if that's their first goal, why are we surprised that the short end of the stick is the service? Because they're not in the business for service. Uber doesn't care whether you get there or not. They care that you pay for doing whatever it is they're doing to you. That's their job, is to sell it. If they can convince you it's something wonderful and you buy it, they're home free. Uber convinced you that it's really new technology. My goodness, on my phone I can just do this, and the car, isn't that sexy? That falls away once the cab company does it, which took them about 2 months. It had nothing to do with technology. What they were offering was something that could be very profitable to them in a nicer car with personal service because they were cheating on the control. They weren't doing the maintenance, the insurance, the vetting. That's all. They were just saving money on the cost. And that's how they got the people to give them money. Look, we're going to be able to charge this for a cab drive, and it's going to cost us that. You see the big difference? That's
You offloaded the maintenance, the expense of maintaining the car. Drivers.
their cars are as decent, the way they work it. The car is the responsibility, in most cases, of the driver. So it's as decent as that driver will maintain it. So now you got the next problem. What is he going to do? What difficulties is he going to have? Then there are people who own fleets of cars, and you're back to square one. Yeah.
Uber is actually losing money as a company, and so I'm wondering how that fits into this narrative.
Well, again, it's the same story. If you're going to start a business that undercuts an existing taxi industry, you're going to have to spend a lot of money telling people to use your service rather than the conventional one. That's going to be the yellow cab doesn't have to advertise yellow cab because they're on the street every day and we all know what it is. So you don't see billboards, hey, ooh, lovely yellow cab. You don't, but Uber has to do that. So Uber has to lay out a fantastic amount of money, basically for two reasons. One, to break into this industry so the scam can be operated. They have to have a reputation. And number two, they're worried that what they're doing will immediately be copied by things like, I don't know, Lyft or 50 others, since it is a child's play. There's nothing here that's complicated. So they've got to have a reputation that'll make it hard for the next company to break in because they've already got it. So they have to be the dominant name, which is why we all know Uber, and we don't know the name. There are dozens of them, by the way, that are operating, some nationally and some regionally. So they have enormous outlays at the beginning, so they need to raise all that money. They will lose for a while. But by the way, every one of the major computer companies that we all think of as great investments, that's how they started. It's not at all unusual for a new company to be losing money for years, even as its stock price goes up, before they actually break even and make a profit. It's only a game of whether you can persuade the venture capitalists to give you that money because of the big payoff at the end. Facebook had that problem, Twitter had that, they all had that kind of problem. So that's why you'll see years of lost money, because they're eating up the money initially set up, and then they hope to reap the benefits when it's done. Folks, yes, ma'am.
You mentioned Seattle twice, and I'm wondering how you think the super expansion of Amazon filters into your comments and to what's happening.
Well, I went to Seattle last year and gave talks there, and it's very impressive. The whole downtown is transformed by what was, I believe, a kind of bad area, deteriorated area, that they've kind of cleaned out, and they're building these, they look like spaceships, or very elaborate buildings where Amazon will have its headquarters. And there are other high-tech companies. Seattle is, like Silicon Valley, it's a center for that kind of thing. I don't know exactly how that plays in. My guess is it's bringing an awful lot of people in who are high-tech people, and who, if you approach them in a certain way, will be sympathetic to left of center Democratic Party or further left. Even though they earn high incomes, they're the kind of people that, so my guess is it helps make the kind of things we're seeing in Seattle possible. It's, by the way, a model. Let me end with this. What's happening in Seattle is more stark, but it's the same thing as happening in Detroit. You know, I've talked to you about Detroit before, so let me end with how Detroit and Seattle are similar, even though Seattle is rich and Detroit is terribly poor. Detroit's, the example is stark. In the middle of Detroit, you know, I've talked to you about how Detroit was a disaster for 40 years and all of that. They lost more than half their population, as there were no jobs, the auto industry left, and all the rest. Right now, there is a renaissance in Detroit. What is that about? The downtown business section, that's what it's called, the business section, and then the downtown near it, are being rebuilt, mostly by one man, Dan Gilbert, who owns Quicken, who has rebuilt the city. He owns about 100 buildings in the downtown area. What they're doing is they're developing a new Detroit. It's going to be much smaller than the old one. It already is. It's going to be a concentration right in the middle of very nice apartment houses, co-ops, condos, lovely expensive restaurants, lots of high-rise office buildings, and it'll be a lovely community of well-off professional service workers. Around them, a sea of unimaginable poverty. Detroit today, which is enjoying this renaissance, you'll see stories in the newspaper, a renaissance of Detroit. It has 40% of the people of Detroit live under the poverty level. 40%. 50% live under the poverty. 40% of the children live in poverty households. It is the new America, the enclave, it's called in other countries. The well-off, glitzy, modern, comfortable, professional, tie and jacket, that is in the middle. And the rest of it, nobody knows, nobody cares. Some of them will have jobs cleaning the downtown, watering the plants that are in the lovely lobbies of the nice buildings, painting them from time to time, driving the Jeep around them at night so nobody comes and steals. There'll be some people who have those jobs, but most of them there will be no jobs for. Seattle is doing the same things, but Seattle is doing it at a different level. Amazon and the other high techs will be the core of a whole new bourgeoisie, if you like. They will have lovely stores. There'll be enough of them to sustain a coach shop so you can get nice leather goods. And you know what they are because they're the same everywhere. That's where they go. They've figured that out. You have a nice set of clothing stores and restaurants, exactly the same thing, and everybody else will be living elsewhere where you won't have to look at them. It's called in sociology these days the impoverishment of the suburbs. It's the ultimate irony. After World War II, People left the city to go to the suburbs, to escape the problems of the city. In this generation, the children of those people don't want to live in the suburbs because they're dying. They want to go back in the city and be near that glitzy, where all the sexy nightclubs and bars and other places are. That's where you want to be. You don't want to be where your parents had you growing up in nowhere, Long Island, where nothing ever happened. No, it's really interesting. So poor people are driven out of the city. Where are they going to go? To the suburbs. And those with money are leaving the suburbs to go and spend that money in the glitzy downtown city. And around them all, a mass of people with nothing. Because the poor are not needed, because the crappy jobs are being exported to other parts of the world. We don't need them. That's why the schools are being abandoned. That's why Mrs. DeVos can do what she's doing to dismantle public schools. Because what do we need to educate all these people expensively for? We have people in the rest of the world desperate for jobs. We can pay them a third of what we pay them here and get harder working people over there in India or China or Brazil or Africa is coming next. The Germans are busy working on building up Africa together with the Chinese or doing their work there. So you're going to have an American population that is divided into this core in the Renaissance city center and a mass of partly invisible suburban, an outer ring of the city, the poor. You see it here too, right? You know what the Bronx is in large parts relative to Manhattan. You know. That's what, it'll vary from each city depending on its history and its geography and so on, but it's the same basic thing. Folks, we've come to the end. Let me thank you all for coming.